All right. What's up, Melanated family? This is your brother Harrison. Welcome back for a brand new episode. This is a brand new episode of the Melanated Convo podcast. I'm excited today, right? Today, we get to talk with a young lady who is a anti-racist personality in America. Like for our country, right? When especially my platform, Melanated Convo, we talk about racism. I talk a lot about white supremacy. So we also need to realize that we have white people in our community who are against racism. Like, and I call it like an anti-racist strategist, just someone who sees a problem and is attempting to strategize to get away from that problem. So when I seen Jill, I thought it was important that we have a conversation. She is currently seeking representation, so she's an author as well. She runs workshops, which is something I want to talk about. She runs workshops for white anti-racists to take leadership around dismantling white supremacy mythology. So all these things we're going to talk about with the sister today. So today on the show, joining us, the author of the upcoming book, Skin in the Game, How White People Benefit from Dismantling White Supremacy. Everybody, please welcome Jill Nagle. Jill, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm so touched that you got all of those facts right. And I'm looking, I could see my image here underneath it says the melanated conversation, thinking I am probably the least melanated person, not only on your show, but kind of like on the planet. I kind of like glow in, not only am I white, I like glow in the dark, blue-green white. So it's a tremendous honor for me. I'm really delighted to meet you, Harrison.
Yes, definitely. I'm happy to meet you as well. And like I told you before we started, having conversations about race is something I think is important. And people, white people, frankly, I think sometimes I'm just curious to know white people's perspective on things and our struggles. And, allyship is appreciated as long as it's genuine, So I'm happy to have you on the show today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Definitely. So talk me through this really quickly. So growing up, what city did you grow up in America?
I grew up in Miami, Florida, and I went to a high school that was about 70% Cuban American, maybe 7% Black. I was one of about 7 Jews, and maybe 3 Asian people. I don't know for sure. I have to go back and look, but yeah. So
got it. So like, how would you? Because I'm gonna walk us to how you got to your mentality you're at now. So as a young person, what was your view on racism? Like growing up in your community as a kid, seeing how everything operated in the country. Like, what was your view on what you were witnessing?
It was not very well formulated as a young person. I didn't have any kind of sophisticated knowledge. I could tell that there were groups of people who were different from me, and I didn't have any kind of critical analysis around that or well thought out formulations. There was my aunt Phyllis did. She was at the time chairing a Black Studies department at a community college as a white Jewish woman, the whole time saying, hey, if any Black person ever wants to come along and take over, I will step aside. And nobody ever did for 25 years. And I was I was a little I was intimidated by her as a young person because she had these very strong views that I didn't know about. And I remember being about in the 3rd grade and being at her house one time, and I didn't know what a Polak joke was. I didn't even know that I had Polish ancestry at the time. And I started to tell a Polak joke. And she thundered across the room, "There will be no discrimination in my house." And I said, all right, well, then how many morons does, and I didn't even, like, how many Polacks does it take to change a light bulb or something like that? And so I switched out the word and I said, all right, how many morons does it take? And before I could even finish my sentence, she says, "That's discrimination against morons. If you want to make somebody the butt of a joke, you make it yourself." And so by that time, the wind had kind of just, buzzed out of my sails. And I told the joke about myself. And as I got older, I came to really appreciate her. I learned that, in 1946, at the age of 19, she had integrated a segregated bus without even really understanding what was going on. She just saw that some people were crunched up in the back of the bus and some were spreading out all over the front. So she just went and asked everyone in the front to consolidate their belongings, and one by one led all of the Black people who were in the back of the bus up to the front.
Mm-hmm.
And then the bus driver was getting angrier and angrier. And then he pulled over and he told her to get off the bus. He said, "You, N-word lover, get off the bus."
Yes.
And she said that she had paid her money to go to New York. She was not about to get off the bus.
Yeah.
And so he did, and he left the group to get to know each other, and eventually sing songs together and exchange food. And so you could say, because of her, that I come by this honestly. And it wasn't until I got into college and came out to myself as bisexual. And I took an issues in feminism course. I remember it was 1986, and half of the course was on sexuality, and the other half was on race and class. And I was shocked to find out that white feminism was racist and classist. And it was then that I realized that being a member of an oppressed group does not necessarily make you automatically sensitive to oppressions of other groups. And there was something about the way, this was a formative moment for me, something about the way that oppression works in general that we need to figure out. Even the way that people treat each other in groups that are supposedly about liberation is sometimes reproducing that same kind of oppression. I remember at that time I was working as a hostess in a restaurant, which was a lot harder than I thought it would be. I thought you just sit people down at tables. Well, it turns out you have to know something about, each server wants a certain rhythm to who's seated at their station. They get really mad at you if you violate that. So it took a lot more than I thought it would. And in the meantime, what I noticed is that the management were a couple of gay white men. And the kitchen staff were mostly straight Black men. And the wait staff were mostly white women. And what I noticed is that the white women would make racist comments about the kitchen staff and homophobic comments about the managers. And the managers would make sexist comments about the women wait staff and racist comments about the kitchen staff. And the kitchen staff, you see where this is going, would make homophobic comments about the managers and sexist comments about the women. I was bouncing back and forth going, wait a minute, what? Shouldn't we all be nice to one another and try to understand each other's experience? And it was an eye-opening experience for me. And that was in the mid-'80s. And it wasn't until I came out to the Bay Area in 1992 and started exploring all kinds of different things. I met Cleo Manago in 1993. And if you don't know, if you haven't had him on your show, I think you're just going to love him. He's such a profound thinker and Black leader. And I was lucky enough to become his friend, and learning his perspective was like kind of opening up this white fog that I had been looking through my whole life. And the main thing I learned from him, and continue to learn in so many ways and so many levels, is the pervasiveness of white supremacy mythology. And some people say, wait a minute, what do you mean mythology? White supremacy is real. Well,
that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah. So let me break that down. Maybe I need to find a better phrase that is sort of more self-explanatory. But so the white itself is not, it's white privilege is certainly real, but whiteness was invented as a tool of oppression. And so light-skinned people of European descent are not inherently superior. That idea is a mythology. And supremacy has two different meanings, right? One of them means I am superior to you, which is a lie. The other meaning is that you know, in a lot of circumstances, we go out into the world, my needs prevail. And so there are ways that light-skinned people with European descent, particularly if they're middle class or higher on the economic spectrum, their needs and wants prevail and get treated with more, you know, deference, more dignity, that sort of thing. So that part is true. But the notion of superiority, of like inherent supremacy, is false. So the mythology part refers to the fact that notion is false. It also refers to how like a culture's mythology suffuses everything, right? Like we have a Christmas mythology of reindeer and everything that suffuses everything. And it's beginning to, you know, wiggle around a little bit. But up until very recently, we didn't have Black superheroes. You know, we didn't have Black political leaders very much, who could get away with not fearing for their lives. And this notion that, you know, all that is good and true and worthy and valuable and trustworthy and basically worthwhile in any way is white. It just permeates. You know?
Definitely. So I definitely think that, you know, the physical nature of like a white person being more physically dominant in all of these things. Of course, we understand those type of things aren't true, but socially, for me, like white supremacy is just basically a system that can socially take advantage of one group over the next. And for the most part, that's based on race. Sometimes it's class. Class could be a thing too, but it's based on race, where you can socially, things can happen. I think a well-to-do white person, or even just a regular white person at time, if I get into an altercation with you and we're in public, you know, the perception in the reality of the country we live in will say, I'm the purveyor in the situation. And then things may get worked out later, but just on a social level, you know, I do think white people get a leg up in our society. And I think one thing that I struggle with Black people and just people in general, I think it's important that we remove the excuse factor, because some people will say, hey, that's an excuse, saying that you've been a victim. I tell people this all the time. I don't walk around acting as a victim, but I'm in a society that can victimize me. And I'm okay with knowing that. I don't want to get into an ego thing where I think I can't be harmed based on my race, and that's just untrue. And I think we fall into traps a lot of times when we're moving along this world thinking being Black doesn't mean something, meaning thinking you can just live where you want, things won't happen. Well, you never know. It can always be you, you know, regardless of how much money you have or what you've been able to achieve in America. So, you know, it's important that we have these conversations.
Yeah, very important. Yeah, sometimes I see my white friends posting like spiritual or personal growth things that say, it's all in your mindset. You know, all you have to do is believe that you can do it, and you are the only thing in your own way. And I think if you're white.
So you don't subscribe to the pick yourself up by your bootstraps idea.
So I think that for me, a lot of this work about undoing white supremacy mythology and life in general, but we're talking about this right now, is about holding paradox. You know, and the paradox in this case, on the one hand, depression is real. That shit hurts, you know, and I don't even know firsthand what it's like to live in your skin and your sister's skin and your mom's skin. You know, I don't know firsthand what that's like. I see and I listen. And then the other hand, to the extent that, you know, so there's two kinds of personal growth in the face of oppression, right? Well, there's probably a lot of kinds, but I'll focus on two specific different kinds. One is where you kind of ignore the oppression. I was talking with a white gentleman who's a therapist, talking about how he talks with his Black clients and he doesn't want to acknowledge racism. And, you know, Cleo and I were telling him, you know, you do your clients a disservice when you gloss over this.
Yes.
White people don't. So one kind of personal growth, spiritual, you know, emboldenment, if you will, is to ignore racism pretend it doesn't exist, and kind of jump over it and say, I'm just going to make the very best of my life, and I'm not going to let these things get me down. And, you know, one can go far on that. And then there's the other kind of empowerment that says, I'm going to understand this phenomenon. I'm going to develop a critical analysis around it. I'm going to reckon with it. That's not the same thing as going victim and going belly up and saying, I can't do anything because of this. It's saying, I see what's going on, and I'm going to use that information to have my brothers and sisters and non-binary siblings, and to learn how to navigate that system. You know, like Cleo Manago has raised millions of dollars of grant money from mainstream institutions and had his critical thinking and cultural affirmation frameworks recognized by the CDC. That's understanding how the system works and working within it and using it for one's for empowerment and breaking down some of the oppressive systems. So I know I just said a lot of words. I'm going to try to sum it up succinctly. So in terms of personal growth and spiritual approaches to bettering oneself, I see two distinct approaches. One of them being, la, 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 I don't see or hear oppression, but let's believe in the higher power. Let's believe in God. Let's trust our source and just kind of push through it all, you know, without acknowledging the reality of oppression and without holding people accountable.
Yeah, I think that's
that can wind up, being very white accommodationist. And then the other one is, hold on, there's a whole lot of stuff going on that we're not okay with, and believing and seeing the positive doesn't make that okay. Of course, we want to be strong. Of course, we want to help each other along. And at the same time, we need to keep recognizing and, you know, keep our bullshit detectors on and not let it permeate our psyches, because that was where so much damage can occur. So that's why I'm holding that paradox, right?
Definitely. And I think that's important. You know, I think both races of Black and white people, we have individuals who seek to just ignore it and say, I'm going to ignore it and still be successful while not thinking about it. And like you said, certain people can get far, but I think ultimately, if we want to remove ourselves from the position we've been placed in, everybody has to acknowledge it to a certain degree. Like everyone doesn't have to be Malcolm X. Like everyone doesn't have to be the marcher or the protester or the agitator. You can use whatever your field of study is to help us, but everybody has to recognize it. And so another question I have for you, Jill. So I appreciate everything you're saying so far. So tell me, like, from a white person's perspective, what does allyship look like to you? Because sometimes we'll have white people come amongst us who they act as if they're for us and they want to help us move forward, but they have an agenda or they have something outlined that they want to get resolved. Like, how do you think what's the best way to approach allyship?
I'm really curious. I'm really curious when you say they have an agenda, like what kinds of agendas?
Well, when I say agenda, I say, like, if you are going into, like, for instance, some of the protests around the country will have white people join the protest in their agitators, or they've been sent to kind of sway the opinion a little bit. I would go even farther back when white people come amongst us in a Christian manner, like African people, when they would come amongst them to say, hey, here's a Bible. I'm coming to you like an evangelist. I'm coming to you to help you, but really I want to take your land. I'm coming to you to help you, but really I have an agenda on my own. So, I mean, just time and time again in America, I think personally, this is my opinion, we've welcomed people into our village. We've welcomed people into our habitat, and opposed to coming and working with us, they come in an intent to take over, or they come with an intent to do anything nefarious, right? So this is a question I've always had for someone who is Caucasian, what's your view of that? Like, how do you approach things when dealing with us to make sure you let us know, I'm not here on anything negative?
Well, first of all, I don't ever want to try to convince a Black person of anything, let alone my own trustworthiness. To me, if somebody doesn't trust me, they maybe have a good reason. Maybe they've had experiences with people who look like me. And so I never want to demand or expect or even ask that someone trust me. To me, trust is something that comes over time. And that's for me as well. Like, I think that, you know, knowing who like to me, it takes, you know, even if I like someone and want to get to know them, it takes like about a year to see who are they? How do they respond to things? Do they stick around when the going gets tough, et cetera? And so I'm in terms of personal relationships with anybody, especially with a non-white, if you will, I want to respect their own pace to welcome me or not, and not try to push that. But also sometimes I meet people online, like I'm online on LinkedIn a lot, and I meet somebody that I really dig, and I'll go listen to their broadcast. And, you know, if we feel like we vibe, that well, maybe we'll have a meeting and, hey, what are you up to? Can I help you? What are you doing? How can I join? You know, so that's really letting things evolve organically, because I'm just, you know, I'm an odd bird of a person anyway, and it's going to be rare that I really, I mean, on the other hand, I really love everybody in some ways. So, but on a level of allyship, to get back to your question more directly, what is my agenda? Well, so the title of my book is Skin in the Game. I think that there is a selfish, if you will, reason, and that I think that white people have been profoundly damaged by white supremacy. I think that white supremacy robbed white people of our humanity, of our rational thinking, of our kind impulses have gotten warped, and we're not even aware of this. And it affects different white people in different ways, and it braids with historical and familial and personal trauma. And so you see like a predictable range of responses, from the overt white supremacist to the la la la, I can't hear you. I don't talk about race. I don't see color. I'm not a racist. Don't bug me with this stuff. Like I'm sure you're aware of all the different forms.
Yes, definitely.
Could take. So my shtick, my unique interest in this, if you will, I think, is to illuminate what the damage has been to white people, and interest white people in dismantling this mess for our own sake. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, hey, look how horribly Black and brown people are getting treated. I think that needs to stop. I do. I think it needs to stop. And I think we need policy and legal and like all kinds of practical changes in the world now, like yesterday. And we also need to look at the unique and profound and large visible impacts that white supremacy mythology has had on us, and get interested in undoing them, because we care about ourselves, we care about our families, we want to raise kids, we care about all of humanity. And I on one of the shows, a brother said something that I thought a long time. It's like, this is, you know, what you're talking about is going to be like in the DSM-5 or 6 or something as an ailment of white people. And I agree. I mean, you see like the insanity that.
Got it. So you mean the negative effects of white supremacy on white people? You mean as far as the mentality, having that mentality towards other people, you mean has like a negative effect on you personally? Like a person, if you're white and you have those negative views and those racist views, you mean that ultimately can have a negative effect on you personally? Okay.
Not even ultimately, but even before it starts. Like, for example, if you want to dehumanize someone else, first you have to dehumanize yourself. And by that, I mean, you have to a certain own humanity before you can be capable of dehumanizing someone else. And I'll give you a little example from my own life. Mostly when I was younger, I used to get catcalled on the street by men. And often it was when they were in a group, so it was harder to challenge them. And the received wisdom is very similar to how white people tell other white people to deal with racists. Like, you flip them off, you ignore them, you just shout out an insult, and then you move on. Nobody ever told me, oh, stop and talk to them and see, you know, what was going on, that they called you that name or made that sound when you walked by that was intended to be so demeaning, apparently. But so I began to experiment with Like I was walking down the street, some guy made some animal in the
your computer.
Not expecting this at all. Said something like, that kind of thing. I remember my own humanity. So that kind of thing really makes me uncomfortable. I really don't enjoy that. And I don't know any women who do. And I didn't call him names. I didn't, try to shame him, but I just really let him know what was going on inside of me and how his action impacted me. And he went, "Oh, I'm sorry." I bet you, Harrison, I bet you he didn't do that again.
Got you.
I bet you he was going to think twice, right? So by remembering my humanity in that interaction, I connected with him in a way that helped him remember his humanity. Mm-hmm. And I hope, made him level of doing that dehumanizing thing again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're saying you liken that to the same way a white person may, hear about racism or know that it's there or see instances of it. So instead of addressing it from a humane perspective, meaning a conversation, empathy, they just shrug it off or act like it's not affecting them or get upset at the moment. Okay.
Or they get upset with the people who were demonstrating the most obvious forms of it, like committing murder, for example. And they point and say, well, those are the real problems. Like, I'll tell you another thing that happened in my life, which was that I'm going to say something that's rather traumatic to remember, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And I'll just refer to it briefly, but when Dylan Roof shot the 9 members of the church, all my progressive friends were all like talking about what a monster he was and how horrible he was. And I thought, wait a second, we're all part of that same system that created him. And to me, it was, and Cleo introduced this word to me in this context, there was a lot of dissociation, that sometimes when a white person demonstrates optical allyship, puts up a Black Lives Matter sign, says, oh, this other white person is so horrible, look how horrible they are, let's denounce them. It's a way of kind of distancing ourselves from what they've done and kind of reminding themselves and everyone else that we're the good white people. Those are the bad white people. So something happened for me. I saw the picture of Dylan Roof. I saw his mugshot and I looked at it, and what I saw when I looked into his eyes was my own autism spectrum son, right before he used to have a violent tantrum. And I thought, holy shit, this could be my son. And I used to sometimes be afraid that my son might grow up to have, not specifically race-based, but like commit some out of control act that was violent. I used to be terrified of that. And I thought, well, he's somebody's son. And that led me to start thinking about the collective white psyche. Kind of like a big dysfunctional family, right? Where this guy, we have these identified patients and they're the problem. These bad white people are the problem, kind of full stop, end of story. How do we take care of them instead of, whoa, look at our history. If you look at our history and the fact that we as white people have abysmally failed to reckon with the impact of enslaving and legally raping your ancestors for 250 years, does it not seem obvious that these kinds of things would continue to happen?
Definitely.
We must reckon with this. We must grow up, wake up, show up, and look at this and reckon with it as white people.
Well, interesting. Now, something I want to touch on real quick. Talk to me about this. So you mentioned, because this is important. This is something I always think about, Jill. You mentioned looking into Dylan Roof's eyes and seeing basically your child. Now, tell me, what does a white person to do with that feeling? Because to me, that's part of the problem sometimes, because we'll have a white kid who does something. And I think when he gets in front of a judge, he gets in front of lawyers, media, people are ridiculing him and seeing what he's going through. They're white too sometimes. So they see their son, they see their nephew. So they think empathy for him opposed to punishing him. You see? So that can go two ways. Opposed to
you're right.
wanting to punish him, you say, this could be my son who made this mistake, whatever it may be. You know, you have more, I think sometimes generally you have more empathy for someone if they look like you. Like the most common thing you can share with someone is the color of your skin and that level of commonality. So that could be a dangerous thing too. Is why I brought that up.
It can. And I'm saying not to the exclusion of accountability, but in the service of greater accountability.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. So my son could do this. So that makes us. Yes, I get it.
I'm saying, hey, white people, let's go to family therapy together and make sure this doesn't happen anymore.
I get it. Great point. Because see, that's when we look at the shooters, the school shooters, and all of this stuff that happens. A lot of times they mention the mental health. They mention, and I'll be honest, we a lot of times say that's bullshit because it's always happening. But if you are white and you see this happening, and let's say it comes out, the young man who did it was aloof, he had mental issues, he would kill cats or whatever, he had these problems. As a parent, you always have to go back to parents and say, wait a minute, white or black, there's parents involved in this. Why didn't the parents see it? Why didn't the parent take action and say, hey, I need to get him some kind of help because God forbid he ends up hurting other people?
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
I agree. And even more than that, those of us who are drawn to thinking on larger scale levels, I want us to step back and say, how do we heal this as a very large group of people?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there was a book that came out a few years ago called Dying for Whiteness, How the Politics of Racial Resentment is Killing America's Heartland, written by Jonathan Metzl. And he looked at poor and working class whites across a 10-year study. And he found that these policies that they advocated, they thought were going to make their lives great again, in fact, increased gun violence, increased suicide, increased drug overdoses, all kinds of things that were actually hurting them.
That makes sense. So you're saying that sometimes poor whites will think the politician or the person in power has their best interests, when in actuality, they just have the best interests of another white person who has money.
Yeah.
So they make you feel like you're included in this because of our whiteness, but our class separates us. And yeah, that makes sense. Now, another question. This is always something I want to ask a white person who's against racism. Like, Jill, you're in a room, because sometimes when white people ask, hey, how can I help? Like, what could I do? And in my opinion, like, if you don't have power, like if you're not in a position of power in America, maybe you can't get things passed and do that. But just socially, you have to let us know. Like, you have to let us know who's racist. You have to speak truth to power. So if you're in a room full of white people, your friends, coworkers, whoever, and there's black jokes that happen, there's jokes about disimpoverished people, how do you address that as a white person in that environment?
I try to speak up and trying to think of an example. There have been times when I've let something go. Something was happening fast, or I didn't figure out a way to intervene. But sometimes I can even be belligerent. I remember I was in
speak up, say something.
Yeah, I remember I was working at TGI Fridays on City Line Avenue in Philadelphia when I was taking a semester off of college. And I was never very good at waiting tables because I have bad short-term memory. But I didn't know that at the time. I just thought I was not very confident. And this white guy saw like a crowd, maybe like, I don't know, 5 and then 10, then 50, maybe 20 black people came into the restaurant, which was unusual for that area. And he's like, what's with all the black people? And I looked at him and I said, what do you mean? I said, the restaurant is largely full of white people. So what's with all the white people? What's with you?
Yeah.
And I don't remember what he said, but then later on, somebody said something that might have been like a little racially something. He said, oh, better not say that, Jill's here, or something like that. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because I thought that I had just offended him or something. But what happened was that it seemed to me that I sparked something in him that made him think. Even if he was associating it with me, something still, something still got raised in him that that impacted him. And so I was glad about that.
That's important. I think when we talk about dismantling this thing that we call racism, of course, you mentioned a minute ago about like the pervasive white supremacist who goes out and shoots up a school and shoots up a building and has the swastikas and like the extreme white supremacist. But I think that's one thing we need to be aware of. But there's another level of it where this person he wears a suit and he may be in charge of a bank or some type of structure that hires people that has influence, and he, for whatever reasons, thinks less of minorities or black people, Mexican people, whoever. He's in a position of power where he's not hiring people now, where he's affecting. This is the systematic part of it, that the nuances that we don't catch as much as we should. And I think these are the people we need to get to. Like, I'm not in the business, my show and everything I do, I'm not in the business, just like you said earlier, of changing someone's mind, right? Like that, I'm not gonna change your mind, whatever, but we need to have the conversation. And I always get to a place where I'm reading things and researching, just trying to figure out, why would someone Caucasian, if you look at just the average white person in America that has a problem with someone black, I would say, give me the antithesis of this problem. Like, what did we actually do to you? This is why I'm always, it's to me, it's like it's just the system that we live in. It's melanin. It's a complex of, if we get in charge, if we get to a position where we're in charge of this thing we call America, we're going to do to you what you done to us. And I don't think that's the case. Like, African people don't think that way, but it's a maze that we all have to kind of get through together, you know? And that's important. I think that's why these type of conversations are important. So you're saying, if you're in a position where, because this is for anybody white who's listening, who wants to be an ally, like if you're in a bar, you're anywhere where negative comments about black people are being made, I think it's important that you say something, because this is how it affects us systematically. When the people in this bar talking could be lawyers, could be judges, these could be people of influence. And to me, if you think this way of a person, your actions may follow, and that could be detrimental to all of us. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes. And I think what you're saying is that people's mindsets can have actual harmful impacts.
How you think is a motherfucker. Everybody needs to check our thoughts. You see what I'm saying? Because I'll be honest, I'm in the rooms I'm in, my black friends, everybody I'm around that's black, never do we have Asian jokes, white jokes. None of this is really even a way that we humor each other. You know what I mean? So when I see other groups of people and I'll find out, hey, they're telling nigger jokes or all this, I'm like, wait a minute. I want to take it as just a joke, but I can't. Based on the country that I live in, based on everything that has taken place, I have to damn near take that as a threat, because a lot of time, these are some of the things you would hear before black people were getting hung and all these things like that. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's
I just got chills when you said that, and it's so true. I mean, and so I have, you know, the double experience of having white privilege in the United States of America with my white skin and my Ivy education, and then the other hand, I've had probably 150 cousins who were never born because relatives of mine were murdered in the Holocaust because they didn't fit the white supremacist Aryan mold. They were Jewish. So it's interesting to be on both sides of that, you know?
Yeah.
And I do want to change people's minds. In my workshops, the way that I work with other people to do it very gently. To do it like with like almost like a cotton's a bad choice word, sorry, like with a foam rubber crowbar or something, like because I think for a lot of white liberals about racism, if you know Uncle Fred or cousin Susie from high school says something racist, their first thought is to unfriend them, you know, go ballistic, you know, ignore them. And, you know, as Asia Davis, who is one of the leaders of the Human Potential Project and of the Facebook group White People Doing Something says, she says, one less racist in your life is not one less racist in my life. And as a woman of African descent, she's saying, you know, to her white audience, if you friend and push away and ignore the white people in your life who were saying stuff, you're not doing me any favors. You're making life more comfortable for yourself. She doesn't say it like that, but I'm saying it like that. And so in my workshops, I teach people and we practice coming to a place of centeredness and getting curious. Like, what makes you say that? Like, to ask really disarming questions, because a lot of times, so we have this polarization now where if you say something that sounds quote unquote woke, then the person who is feeling criticized is going to polarize and fight you, and they won't transform. They won't change their thinking. But if I'm on the bus and the guy says something under his breath, it's like, what did you just say? Mm-hmm. What makes you say that? Have you had experiences? Oh, how did you come to think that way? And to introduce some what some of the podcasters are calling metacognition, there are people who have never reflected on their thoughts, let alone why they think the way they do. And so it can be really transformative to say to somebody, when did you first learn to think that way? What happened? And for most people, there is a moment where a parent or a grandparent, or maybe they had a situation that, made them adopt their mindset. And then they got braided with some trauma, with something that's hard to unravel. And so with some kindness and some inquiry, and I'm not saying this is easy. I'm making it sound quite simple, and it is simple in some ways, but it's not always easy. Because I just want it. I might get really mad. I want it like, what are you saying? That's not okay.
Wait, okay. So your workshops, because I was going to ask this, because you have the anti-racist workshop. So you're saying if you're in the workshop and you're addressing someone who has racist ideologies, you're saying in that workshop you have a conversation with them. You kind of ask.
We practice. We don't invite people who have racist ideologies to the workshops, although everyone's welcome. We role play, and we spend a lot of time very slowly being with our own reaction and practicing coming from a place of curiosity and compassion, so that when the thing actually happens, we won't just be reacting in the same old way. We'll have laid down some new neural pathways that will open up more choice for how we actually want to show up and create a conversation that could be truly transformative. Now, some studies have shown that any encounter with somebody different, even if it was a negative one, will change people for the positive. And so even how, apparently like how I kind of yelled at that guy in TGI Fridays. What do you mean? What's with all the white people? So that apparently did impact him. And sometimes that is what I'm naturally kind of feisty, and so sometimes that is what will just come forth.
Yeah, but I think the most important thing is that you said something. Yeah, because I think what white people don't realize is your silence. Silence is saying something. You're actually speaking by not saying something. So you can get online and say, hey, all Black Lives Matter, and like you was talking about, have the Black Lives Matter flag and do all this like things you want to do for us as far as the media and what you see that you don't like. But if in your own circle, if you don't address it, then you're not really helping us, right? So Gio, another question I have for you: how do you feel? There's a big argument around reparations going on in America right now. Like, how do you feel about that? Do you feel Black people deserve reparations?
I do. I think it'd be good for everyone if we could agree on, like, have some real conversations about what that would mean, what it would look like. There's this fiction or mythology, if you will, in the United States of America that we all just kind of landed here without any history, and that it's equal opportunity for everyone. And I think that history and ancestry and all that is profound, and we're all being impacted by it. It's not part of our national consciousness or vocabulary. But so, like, I want to have like a meta conversation, but how do we hold that? Nobody, like, if you think about it, like, everybody has a strained relationship to this land. I mean, the First Nations people were almost wiped out, and just kind of right.
And that's the thing. Most of, if not all of the groups that came here and were mistreated, even sometime on foreign land, America fixed it. America fixed it. America said, hey, here's some money, here's some land, here's some allotments. They figured it out. But it seems like when it comes to reparations for Black people, in which case we were promised 40 acres and a mule. This is the real thing. We were promised something but never received it. when it comes to give us reparations, it's like, well, how do we do it? Do we give them land? Do we give them money? Well, I mean, you just came up with the COVID money like that. Whatever. How'd you do the PPP loan money? Do it the same way. How did you come up with the money for the Ukrainian people? That was quick. It wasn't a lot of deliberating. It was quick. You came up with it. You gave it to them. The Jews got reparations. The Asian people got reparations. I have a lot of research I was doing about that because I speak with a brother named Chris Lodgson, who's a member of one of the boards in California, who's seeing to it that they truly look into reparations. And I think that's important. America needs to atone for what they've done to people who have ancestry in slavery. And that's a true thing, you know?
I agree with you. And I don't think like a lot of the treaties with First Nations, with Indigenous people were broken. And there's the stuff that's still going on. It's, you know, a friend of mine who's active in that community says our Holocaust is still happening. There's difference. So I'm very interested in that. And I think a broader, I want to see a broader and more nuanced conversation. I'd love to know more about, is it Chris Hodgson?
Chris Lodgson. Yeah, I'll send you his information. He is connected with people who are part of the California. There's a reparations task force that's been created here in California, and they've just established the fact that how you'll be able to get reparations in California is based on your lineage. So they're not going to do it directly on race, because when that happens, people can jump in and say, hey, I'm 5% Black, I'm 2% Black. It's going basically to lineage, where if your mother can trace her lineage to slavery in the 1870 census, I think it is, then it'll be good to go. You know what I mean? So I think that's an important thing that we all need to think about. Now, you have, I looked at your website. It's called Evolutionary Workplace. Is that your business? Is that is that how you do your workshops and stuff?
That's the vehicle through which I offer the workshops. Cleo, Manago, and I ran the 22nd Century Leaders Program last year. This year, we're offering individual and group coaching to white leaders who want to basically up their anti-racist game, polish their lens about recognizing when white supremacy mythology is happening in their midst, and figure out ways to have the conversations and to create the measures to repair that.
Got it. Now, what is the response you get? So when you're talking to white people about this racism thing, what's the response that you typically get? Because it sounded like you were saying most of the people there don't necessarily have racist views. Is that what you were saying earlier?
The people who've been attracted to my workshops have had at least some kind of inkling that they want to make things better.
Okay. And from your perspective, having the workshop is fine. I think creating a conversation around making these changes is a good thing. What else do you think white people can do? If you want to dismantle this systematic thing we call white supremacy, what else do you think can be done?
I think there's so many levels to work on. And I believe that everybody has some gift, whether it's to make art or to have transformative conversations, or to get in there and really work at the ground level with policies and programs. Some people are really gifted in that realm. I don't think one person can do everything, but I definitely think everybody can do something. Some people have more money than time, and they can support organizations that are doing great, like Mr. Lodgson's. So one of the things that I do is that there's what I call drive-by interactions. For example, on LinkedIn, if a Black person posts something very pro-Black, which there are a lot of Black leaders who are doing that, like Madison Butler and Emmanuel Acho, inevitably there are going to be white detractors, 9 out of 10 times men, but sometimes women too, who are like, why do you have to make such a big deal? Why do you always have to emphasize? That you've heard it a million bazillion times, the kinds of things that white people will say in response to a really kind of big pro-Black message. And so when I have time, and one of the things that I do is I scan for that person and I start engaging them, and see if I can tease out what's driving them and have a transformative conversation about it.
Wait, so has that worked out for you? Because sometimes I know online, this is what I've noticed being in the online space. Sometimes we have a lot of trolls, people who aren't really interested in having dialogue. They're just either sent by someone or they're just there to throw off the energy of the room or whatever. But, you know, I understand that, though. Having the conversation, if somebody's willing to have the conversation, that's always a good thing. But online, it seems like there's always a lot of people just looking to kind of sway the energy one way or another. You know what I mean?
And those are the ones that I want to go after. And I have a kind of even perverse attraction to that. Like, oh, you want to say that kind of thing? Say it to me, because we're gonna get into it. And like I borrow from, I mentioned Cleo a lot because he's been so influential to me. But like, if you feel strongly enough to show up in this space and say something, then how about you discuss it with me? Tell me how you came to feel that way. What do you base that on? Where do you get your sources of truth? What makes you believe that?
Now, if you don't mind me asking, Jill, do you have kids?
I do. I have a son who's 19. Yeah.
So raising a young white man in our society, how did you approach the race conversation when he was a child?
A lot. We talked about it a lot. Trying to think. You know, and I tried to keep it age appropriate and temper my own passions, but it kind of seeped through. My views seeped through to him. I remember we watched this vapid white show called How I Met Your Mother. Sorry, Josh Radnor, but and we really used the show as a springboard to talk about all kinds of things. Sexuality, dating, attitudes, you know, the racial attitudes that were expressed on the show. And then, you know, when the show was over, we were thinking, gosh, what are we going to watch next? And he comes to me one day and he says, hey, Mom, I found another series that I think you'll really like. It has people of color and a strong female lead. Okay, my son understands me.
Okay, so you're saying from like when he was a really young dude, from that time on, you would talk to him about race and the stuff that you've seen and the news stories and everything.
Yeah, I mean, in age appropriate ways, and me just living my life, saying what I think, really obviously impacted him.
That's important, and that's because, you know, even Black people, we should go the same direction. Like as far as just educating your own children on what's going on outside, because like you were talking about earlier with the whole Dylan Roof thing, I think when we look at the young white kids who are doing things that's traumatizing the country, like this is a crisis we need to address. Like the shooters, a lot of the shooters, if not all of them, have the same demographic. Like this is something we have to pay close attention to in this country. And as white parents, like you were saying earlier, you need to be accountable. You need to be accountable and say, okay, what am I teaching my kid? If you have a 16-year-old son who is going into these white supremacist circles, going into these 4chan and all these different places where they practice white supremacy, I think sometimes it's pervasive in the house too. Like I always liken your home is like your own little country. If you're in the home and you're speaking about racism in a certain way, if you're speaking about underprivileged people in a certain way, to assume your kids aren't going to pick up this ideology is foolish. You know what I mean? So I think the kind of workshop, I say all that to say, I think the kind of the workshops that you have in that type of work is important. I think we all have a role to play. Being Black in this country, I feel I have a position to play and uplift my people and do what I can to point out things, but white people too. You know what I mean? You can't sit by. Nobody should be sitting by just watching what goes on, especially if you're against it, you know?
Yeah. And I think that white supremacy is a white created, white perpetuated problem, period. End of sentence, full stop. And therefore it is up to us to stop it and fix it.
Yes, because that's why I asked you earlier about the whole bootstrap argument, because that's thrown at us a lot of times. It's always pushed off to us like the advantages and the opportunities that this country have provided a lot of people kind of missed us. And then when we bring it up, it's like, hey, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. But in my opinion, no group of Americans have ever done that. Every group of Americans have had some type of assistance at some form of their civilization here. You know what I mean? Not
oh
us.
hell yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I keep saying like Coffrey J, hip hop for, I can't remember his name. Somebody on LinkedIn was recently giving a talk, and he and some other of his Black colleagues were talking about the white people who come and harass him, and the ignorance and the, you know, just the meanness. And I say, please tag me anytime you want. Like, if you don't want to deal with somebody, just tag me, and if I am available, I will come and engage them and take. I see that as part of what I can offer, is I try to take the heat off, because I just see, you know, the Black people on LinkedIn are so exhausted and so over it. It is just relentless. There's always somebody else. It's like whack-a-mole, you know.
And I understand this country is based in power, right? So I know all white people don't have the power to change laws and things of that nature, but you have the power to change your mind in particular. You have
White
power
people
to change around the people around you and make an effect, you know what I mean? That can prevent a lot of the problems that we see.
And a lot of people are in places where they can change laws. So I think it's up to us too to demand that those changes be made.
True.
You know, there are lots of opportunities to exert influence, whether it's signing a petition or contributing to a politician. There's always something that we can do. There is an article that I can send you by a white woman for white people, called something like 100 and some things you can do to combat racism.
That's important, because you're right. A lot of times the people in power, the white men and women in power, a lot of times aren't interested in fixing race relations.
No,
they're not interested in dismantling the system that for a lot of them has got them to where they are now. You know what I mean? So we need the people in power that are Caucasian to kind of see things the right way. But I always talk to my community, Jill, about us being self-sufficient too. You know, I definitely think we're owed reparations, and this country has to atone for what has happened to us. But ultimately, looking at each other, building up our community, this is all we can do, because relying on the government to come in and with a magic wand fix things or get things it just hasn't happened yet. So
no, that magic wand is going to be a billy club.
It's going to be a goddamn billy club. And we need to recognize that. That's why I like history. I like my ancestors. I talk about all of this ad nauseum, not based on an excuse like me and you said earlier, but it's for the empowerment. So if I keep realizing how much I love my ancestors, how much they love me, then I can infuse that same love on the people in my community, and the same love and the willingness to defend them, right? To feel like we're all one. When I see somebody, Jill, in Houston, because I'm in Sacramento, California, when I see somebody in Houston get killed by the cops, if I see somebody in Atlanta get killed by the cops, these are all my brothers. I don't separate based on what part of the country you come from, if you come from Africa or not. At the end of the day, when the cops see you, you're Black. They're not delineating, okay, this is an Atlanta Black man. This Black man's from Congo. They don't give a shit about none of that. So a level of unification has to take place. With all the conversations we're always having, I'm always willing to do it, but a code of conduct and a level of unification is going to be necessary for us to fix our problems, you know?
Yeah.
Now, talk to me about your book. So, Skin in the Game, How White People Benefit from Dismantling White Supremacy. What are some of the premises in your book that you kind of cover?
So I talked about a couple of them already. One of them is that white supremacy mythology produces in white people a set of mindsets that we didn't consent to, and that govern parts of our psyche in terms of how we respond to things, how much of our humanity we have access to, how much capacity for reason we have access to. Because, you know, when part of your brain is being hijacked by knee-jerk reactionary white supremacist bullshit, that's, you know, a part of your brain that could be freed up to do other useful things than that, you know. And so I talk about how we're all subject to that unless we recognize it, develop a critical analysis, and get out of it. Definitely. And when we get out of it, then, and our natural humanity is activated, then, you know, most of us are going to want to do something about dismantling white supremacy. rather than feeling powerless and confused and reactive.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely, Jill. So I appreciate you for coming on the show, Jill. And I think, man, we just need to continue. I think society would be simple if we looked at everyone living in society, white, black, green, indifferent. If you looked at the worst parts of society and just said, I'm going to try and fix this. Look, what's happening? What group of people are getting subjugated the most, right? Whether you're poor, whether you're Mexican, white, whoever you are, if we focused on fixing the subjugated people, fixing the areas of society that are lackluster, a lot of the problems we have would be eliminated. But it's a catch-22 because the country operates so well off of all these dysfunctions. So much money made, it's so much profit, it's so much greed. You know what I mean?
I do.
Yeah. So this country has a lot of atoning to do, and I think I would be counterproductive as a black man to not try and fix this problem while I'm alive. Because look, Jill, I have 5 grandkids. I have 5 kids, 5 grandkids. These are 10 young people I'm responsible for. I don't want them to have to worry about getting stopped by the cops in 2040. I don't want them to have to be worrying about being treated a particular way because they're black 30 years from now. You know what I mean? So us as adults, us that are here alive in this small journey through our life, because even if you live to 90 something, that was a blink in actual time. Use your time to help out. Use your time to fix our systems. And this could be homeless. This can be the racism problem. Find a problem that bothers you and commit yourself to it. You know what I mean?
I agree.
Yeah. So tell us, do you have a release date for the book yet? Do you have any ideas of when it's going to be coming out?
So I have a book proposal, and in September, I'm going to start querying potential agents.
Got it.
And if I get an agent, then the agent will try to sell the book to a publisher.
Got it.
So that's where I am with it. Yeah. And I've published, I've published some of the ideas in the book in different forms. Like I haven't published there in a while, but I am on Afrosapiophile, which is a Medium channel run by Johnny Silvercloud. So
got it. Okay. So when you finally publish the book, we'll have you come back, talk about the reception of the book, talk about everything that's been going on. So yeah, Jill, I'm happy to have you on the show today. Tell everybody, where can they reach out to you? What's your Instagram handle, your website, all those things?
Sure. So you can find me at evolutionaryworkplace.com. You can reach me at jill@evolutionaryworkplace.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I have 2 different profiles there, and the one that you want for this kind of thing is the one that has a tagline, Dismantling White Supremacy from the Inside Out.
Got it. Okay, so everybody connect with Jill, ask her questions. If we have Caucasian people listening, this is the type of person you would need to talk to, because I think, Jill, sometimes you can have a white person who may feel that things are wrong, like even some of their ways of thinking are wrong, but they don't have a black friend or know anyone black, or may not feel comfortable going to someone black and say, hey, why is this happening? Like, give me a better perspective. But
and do it for free.
White, they may feel more comfortable to say, hey, Jill, walk me through it. Like, why is that happening? Let's talk about it at least. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I can come into your group or club or organization or workplace and talk with groups. It's better to have an ongoing thing, but we can come in, we can do it for an hour or 2, do a lunch and learn too.
Definitely. So everybody get in contact with Jill. We're going to have her back when the book comes out. This has been another episode of the Melanated Convo. So we're going to have these conversations, man, and discuss everything that can be done in our society. I despise racism. And when I see white people who are against me, I honestly, I come back with the same amount of vigor. I'm not a turn the other cheek type of individual, never will be. But because I'm able to go there, I'm also able to show empathy and say, hey, if a genuine conversation is going to be had, I'm going to calm down and have the conversation. And afterwards, we don't even have to agree. But if it was genuine, respectful, That's all we can ask for, everybody. So this has been another episode of the Melanated Convo podcast. Please go to the website now. The website is up and running, melanatedconvo.com. Melanatedconvo.com. Go to the website as soon as possible. Like this video, share this video. The Instagram is melanatedconvo100. Again, family, this has been another episode of the Melanated Convo podcast. The brother Harrison, Jill Nagle, our special guest. Thank her for showing up today and gracing us with her presence. This has been another episode.